I love how she opens this interview with, and a neighbor, lent this space to us so we could sit on their beautiful pergola. Just throwing out pergola at the beginning of this interview. I'm like, these 17 million Americans watching this interview don't know what the a pergola is. They barely got patios, girl.
Girl, say gazebo and keep it moving.
Welcome to Keep It, Crooked Media's show about pop culture and politics and what happens when they smack into each other at an alarming speed. I'm your host, Ira Madison III, a television writer and Fall Out Boy fan.
I'm Louis Fertel. I'm a TV writer and Jane Fonda historian.
And I'm Aida Osman. I'm a TV writer and alleged comedian.
Let's get into it. On Sunday, Oprah invited her new neighbors, Harry and Meghan, and 17 million viewers, not to her own Montecito estate, but to some random neighbor of theirs still, for some afternoon tea. And it was spilled, girl.
Yeah, all over their frocks. It was wild.
I hate to be another person making a spilling tea joke, but they are British.
No, what else do they drink? I don't even think they have water over there. Just tea comes out of the faucet.
Spilling the beans and toast.
There you go.
No.
But by the way, I tuned in sort of on accident. I was watching something else. I had forgotten to even look forward to this. And then it took milliseconds of this to realize, oh, this is an event. Like, oh, we're learning things actually. I didn't realize, I should have known, because when Oprah does an interview, whoever does the pre-interview figures out there's going to be revelations. And if you remember, for example, I think I've brought this up on the podcast before, but Mackenzie Phillips, who was like the daughter of Jon Phillips from the Mamas and the Papas, she did a tell-all interview once with Oprah on her show. And I remember thinking, I've seen every Eat Your Hollywood Story about the Mamas and the Papas. I've seen every Behind the Music. What else could she say? Oh, she's revealing she had an incestuous relationship with her father. Like, there has to be something in order for Oprah to be involved,
Oprah's not just going to rehash some shit, you know what I mean? Oprah's going to make it all spill out.
I first want to address the location of the interview, because Oprah opens this up with Meghan first. And she's like, Harry will be joining us later. They do this pretend social distancing hug. Oprah's like, we can't hug each other because of social distancing. The crew is double masked. They all have face shields. I'm like, girl, you are not going to convince me that you, Meghan, and Harry, and little baby inside you, little Archie, all of y'all are not vaccinated at this point.
Right.
Yeah. Or also that you guys didn't all get tested prior to having this meeting, and that you would be able to hug. It felt very performative. Even panning over to the cameraman. They
did that, and then when they showed the other parts of the interview that are like the next day, they're just walking next to each other and sitting in a chicken coop. So what was with the performance in the beginning?
And by the way, I actually have a petty question. Did we love Oprah's outfit? Because she went mauve on mauve, and I found it underperformed in terms of a primetime event.
Some people were loving it. I found it very appropriate, I guess. It seemed like she was dressing up as a British investigator. the glasses, the sweater. It seemed very much like she was in a reboot of Perot.
Yeah. I like the crease skirt, the satin, the sheen to it. It was giving Man Repeller. It was giving like just youth. Oprah was giving youth.
The boots were hidden.
The boots, oh my God. Girl,
Oprah in the boots.
And also the complementary nature of the pinks and the greens. Like, there was some planning.
Yeah, she was better dressed than Meghan.
True enough. Also, I mean, it was very like patio culture. I felt her outfit, she's somebody who belonged in a wicker chair, so all right, I'll allow it.
The location, as I was saying, was a neighbor's of theirs. They live next to Oprah now, but they didn't have the interview at either of their homes.
It might have been another Tyler Perry Habitat for Humanity estate that he just owns.
But I love how she opens this interview with, and a neighbor, lent this space to us so we could sit on their beautiful pergola. Just throwing out pergola at the beginning of this interview. I'm like, these 17 million Americans watching this interview don't know what the fuck a pergola is. They barely got patios, girl. It's
Stay relatable.
It's a porch. Girl, say gazebo and keep it moving.
But you know what? I thought it was appropriate because as we always say on this show, we do not want our celebrities to be relatable.
No, again, Oprah should be cruel. She should look straight to camera and be like, I can't believe you're even invited to see this. You know, there should be a cockiness about the whole thing.
So the interview, of course, was to discuss what the British press has dubbed Megxit, which, girl, I'm already preparing myself for the next 2 decades of hearing blank zit to describe anything that happens in the UK. The same way that Watergate has forced us to have blank gate for like 4 decades now.
And it counts as a pun. Like, that really is horrible. Also, there's something about Megxit, like the G next to the X. Like, it's as ugly a sound as they want it to be, you know, to kind of throw shade her way.
Also, that's the sequel to The Meg. So I'm always going to be confused about what we're talking about here. The interview was to discuss their exit from the UK, you know, leaving the family behind. There were revelations. What do we think of the interview in general?
Ooh, first of all, this interview, I had to literally scrape my jaw off the floor every 5 seconds because what was most interesting to me wasn't even what they was talking about, what they was doing. It was everything that was left unsaid by the end of this interview. The whole time I'm thinking about Prince Andrew, I'm thinking about Princess Diana, I'm thinking about the scandals, I'm thinking about history repeating itself. It was, as Lewis said, and as we're all saying, an iconic moment in pop culture, but also so many questions are left. I have so many questions.
And I want to say that I felt like the general attitude online was people, well, first of all, missing Oprah, which is very fair because she has a specific presence as an interviewer and specifically entertaining as an interviewer, which that alone is a skill. But
I don't just miss Oprah. I miss Oprah after the show.
Oh, right. Well, she kicks off her like moccasins or whatever and keeps it going. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I felt like it was a pretty ultimately flattering interview to the two of them. And I'm not saying it was meant to be like an ambush in any way or whatever, but I would say it was a B+ interview that was an A in entertainment.
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. Yeah. It was mostly a nostalgia moment for me because obviously the history repeating itself conversations about Diana, you're seeing those parallels, but really the interview itself was so entertaining to me because, yes, I miss Oprah.
Yeah.
You know, I think that like Royce and I are watching it on the couch and like we're most riveted just by like Oprah's skills. You know, you miss her interviewing skills, the way that she sort of is okay with silences in interviews, you know, the way that, you know, she like just sort of like leans in, you know, and asks those follow-up questions. He's a great interviewer. And I do really miss that, you know, because like she's got like the Oprah podcast or something now, but it's like you can't really do that in segments. I miss that visual Oprah on the couch interviewing someone moment, you know, but also like aside from them, like who is big enough for her to be interviewing at this point, unless she went back to just interviewing, you know, everyday people, right? I believe that she did that. I believe that the last thing of this we got from her was that CBS interview where she was interviewing like Trump voters.
Oh, right. Yes. What I appreciate about Oprah is that she unpredictably varies between being like an interested observer, a fun high school guidance counselor, and then world's greatest detective. Like, so like the seriousness level changes and is surprising. And if something is unclear, she's usually good at picking out, wait, you were unclear about that. Let's get back into that. And which was interesting here because I thought Meghan was generally very straightforward seeming. It did not feel like she was avoiding talking about anything. So for Oprah to still dig into things like what is the firm or explain the difference between like isn't the Queen partly responsible for this and et cetera, even though the Queen came out deeply unscathed by this.
Which I think is partly because she knows how many people are watching this interview. And, you know, a lot of those people barely probably even remember the Diana one, all of it, right? And the idea of discussing the Queen, the palace, everything as the firm or the establishment is very, 2005 WB sci-fi series.
Yes. The Michigan J. Frog days of the WB, yes.
The Hallowell sisters are taking on the firm this season. And so a lot of that was probably just for, clarification for the audience. But she got to her most detective when they talked about, one of the biggest revelations, which was that there had been conversations from family members about how dark Archie would be.
The funniest conversation.
Yes. And Oprah's response, who is having that conversation? And then Meghan sort of revealed that the conversation was had with Harry and relayed to her. And, she was like, I'm not going to out the person who did this. And Oprah's like, okay. But then the Perot jumped back out when Harry sat down to join Meghan. She was like, okay, now who was having that conversation? Harry.
And he was very sheepish. He was like, I don't want to say who that is. And I was wondering if I was angry about that.
I was.
Here's the thing. I've seen a lot of people say, well, who's surprised that, the royal family or whatever is racist? Not me, but I am surprised it went to that level where we're just straight up describing racial aesthetics of a fucking child.
But also put aside the fact that this conversation about him being whatever color is so stupid. This little British mulatto baby came out the color of Aaron Carter. He came out Joseph Gordon-Levitt, ambiguous. What did they do? They were like, he's going to come out like Don Cheadle. What were they worried about? Toffee. The color of toffee was this baby. And the
Harry Potter and the one drop prince.
The one drop, the octoroon, the Homer
Meghan is already light as hell herself, girl.
What? It was ridiculous between a ginger and a light-skinned woman.
Right. Okay, and then you got all the House of Windsor inbreeding. I mean, come on. That baby was going to turn out like chalk.
So that conversation aside, I agree. What I liked about this was that Harry deliberately left an ambivalence about what happened and who and the exact specifications of the conversation, which allows us to speculate and just be like, okay, fuck the whole institution. I think that might have served more use than him pointing directly out who had that conversation with them.
Absolutely. I will say, though, that they followed up with Oprah via text so she could announce on the news the next morning when she and Gail discussed it, that it was not the Queen, it was not
Prince Philip,
his dad,
or Prince Charles.
Or Prince Charles. I definitely think it was William.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
I was mostly joking when I say that I think it's William, although I do think that he is most upset at William. I think he was upset at his father for sort of ignoring his phone calls after all of this. But, I think that he was raised sort of in an environment where he witnessed sort of the drama going on between his father and Diana. So he's probably seen his father shut down emotionally before, I assume.
We've all witnessed Harry's descent away from the monarchy for the past, his entire life. His removal from the entire family and from the conversations around his family have been present since forever, since he left to go join the military.
So I would say, if anything, he's probably most upset with his brother, because the beginning of the interview with Oprah and Meghan really talks a lot about the double standards in the British press, how they would say one thing about Kate and then say, and then when Meghan does the exact same thing, it would be a problem. Because the British tabloids are racist. And then specifically a story about how she had made Kate cry once, but it was the exact opposite. Kate had made her cry, and she was shocked that no one's taught to correct this story.
The way I'm stealing the phrase, the reverse happened, for every time I get in trouble. Actually, the reverse happened.
Ira, did you enjoy the WandaVision finale?
The reverse happened.
But by the way, I want to see the footage of Kate making somebody cry, because we have not seen that Kate Middleton ever. You know, she is somebody who's her life has been perfecting the Vanna White wave, and nothing else has made it to the surface.
I see it. She has such a Regina from Once Upon a Time, such a Nancy Reagan sort of quality.
Yes, you know, she looked one of the
She's
flower
an
girls.
operator.
Exactly. She looked a 4-year-old flower girl in the eye and was like, "Bitch, is that half it up?" And started making Meghan ball. Oh God, she looks like she has a little evil streak to her.
Well, also don't forget that she comes from party decorations as an industry. So the aesthetics of a wedding were likely
important.
Front of mind for this queen. Yes.
Yeah. So I definitely think the thing that upsets Harry the most is stories like that, and the fact that his brother has had no interest in publicly disavowing the hatred that his wife has been getting. And I think if you and your brother are both children of Diana and know what your mother has gone through, to see your brother sort of allow that to happen to your wife, your brother who will become the king someday, I think that is probably the biggest betrayal.
Definitely. Also, by the way, I just have to say about Harry in this interview, he did not seem happy to me. I mean, it just seemed to me like somebody who his whole life has been satisfying people's curiosity and something. Like, it's like people are just asking, like, wanting more of the truth from him. And it's like, he called himself trapped, etc. We can talk about the, I guess, strangeness of that. But at the same time, I feel like he must feel like a piece of meat. I mean, it's been his entire life. He's had to like subject himself to the press and like misleading headlines, etc. So in a way, watching him talk to Oprah, which, you know, like let's say Oprah's interviewing me, I'm having the time of my life. This is like, you know, I did not see even a glimmer of excitement about him.
One thing that I did like to see through Harry's even being in the interview and having these conversations is the literal evolution of masculinity that we've seen from his father's lack of talking about Diana's mistreatment to now him being here next to his wife and being what appears to be very strong, but there's definitely torment and sadness.
That's very interesting, Aida, that idea of the evolution of masculinity, because I specifically remember, you know, when we were younger, the idea of Harry was, you know, he's the one who joins the military, right? You know, like he's
bad boy,
specifically like, the bad boy, the partier, you know, he's specifically like, I am a man.
Shirtless at the club on Daily Mail articles. Right. I remember that.
And now to see him in an Oprah interview, in these soft tones, holding Meghan's hand throughout the entire interview, being a husband, which is his job, by the way. You know, protect your wife, do your damn thing, the one thing you expect it to do. But I will also say that the Oprah question about, you know, how he felt trapped, right? Let's get into that. Because when he said that, you know, he felt trapped, Oprah was like, wait a second, you know, coming from privilege, you know, royalty, like you feel trapped. Part of me felt like that was a question that she was asking for the audience again for clarification, just because Oprah knew that statement alone, you know, sort of uninvestigated, could maybe like spiral out into like a problem for him or like a quote that is not conducive to the rest of the conversation, you know? So I feel like she needed that clarification there, because there's no way Oprah doesn't really understand that, like, of course that boy feels trapped, you know? Right. I mean, I feel like the whole thing of American culture has been talking about how, you know, like, institutions that we're all a part of, you can feel trapped in them, you know? Like, it was a revelation when you were like housewives in like the 50s, you know, could feel like trapped, even though like their lives look perfect, you know? And
I've seen Big Little Lies. It can all look wonderful on the outside.
And we watch The Crown now, right? You know, like
so does Oprah.
We watched a little. We watched a bit of it. We watched a little bit.
So the idea that, you know, a young boy raised in this privileged world could still could still feel trapped by it is not shocking to me. But it makes sense that she would investigate that in the conversation because a lot of people are idiots.
Right. She's standing in for like people in the middle of the country. You know,
middle Americans who are going to see that and respond, you're trapped, I'm trapped, I can't pay my bills, etc. You know, because most people, not just in America, most people in the world, you know, cannot look past their own worldview and understand why someone else could also be going through pain.
Right.
It's as Jenny and Georgia would say, the oppression Olympics. If my life is bad, no one else's life could possibly be bad. No one else could possibly be going through emotional turmoil. So one of the biggest revelations of the interview was when Meghan talked about how she had experienced suicidal thoughts, wanting to take her own life due to the barrage of racism from the British press.
And the way she like received that information, how it would be friends panicking, or it would be, you know, it wouldn't be the people immediately around her informing her in a sort of responsible way. It was sort of like she felt very secluded from the world, yet receiving panic from the people closest to her.
And that was the real history repeating itself stuff that Harry kept bringing up, because it reminded me of the 95 interview that Diana did with the BBC, where she talked about, you know, her bulimia, and she talked about how, you know, she felt trapped within this marriage, you know, that Prince Charles didn't even want to be a part of, you know, and how she was sort of left to her own devices. And when she asked, you know, the firm for help, she didn't get it, you know. And to hear Meghan talk about how she was thinking of taking her own life and like couldn't get help from anyone, right? You know, like she couldn't just go to the hospital. It was heartbreaking, actually, to hear Meghan talk about the fact that she felt trapped, felt suicidal, wanted to take her own life, and couldn't get any help, you know,
especially
from
when
Buckingham Palace.
When she talked about how she was pregnant with Archie and she was in Buckingham Palace, and I didn't realize the gravity of her isolation, her not having a passport or her ID or any keys or access to leave the palace, and not leaving the palace for 4 months. That's going to take a toll on anybody's mental health, let alone a pregnant woman.
That's the shit that always irritates me. You had people like former Keep It guest Bethany Frankel tweeting up a storm, being like, cry me a river. You know, you're a princess. You have access to all this money, etc. It just really highlights how stupid people are. You know,
or like willingly dense. Yeah, like yes. I'm sorry. Think about living at that palace and not having, as Aida just said, like your ID around you. What are you actually doing? What is your like day-to-day life like? It sounds like it's filled with nothing. I mean, yeah. I'm obviously reiterating what I've seen Emma Corrin go through on The Crown, but I mean, it truly does boggle the mind thinking of what. Yeah, it boggles the mind thinking of how you fill most of your days. Like, what are you doing on a Wednesday at 4:30? I just want to know. You know, like the rest of us are like texting it up with friends, or you know, feeling normal, feeling safe, and it sort of seems like she just felt like nothing.
She's reading an article about how an avocado is poisoning the world while she eats one. Like that is the weird level of attack. And all she was ever given access to was hatred and vitriol from the outside. And like you were saying earlier, Lewis, her friends not even realizing, her family not even realizing the amounts that they were giving to her, putting on her radar.
What's really interesting was that a lot of the conversations prior to this interview were, how dare they do this interview during a pandemic when so many people are suffering, right? You know, and I think that this pandemic should actually give people more sympathy with her. How often do people talk about the fact that they've just been in their houses, they don't have human contact, they can't leave, you know, they feel trapped by these circumstances, and she is literally living through a pandemic daily, right? Like she can't leave. If you are online talking about how you are emotionally pained because you can't see your closest friends or family and hug them, imagine what this girl is going through every day.
Ira, to your point, I totally agree with you. Would also even add that without the pandemic, this actually desensitized us to how ludicrous it is that she was in that palace for 4 months. That is over a season. That's a prisoner. She was really doing a bid.
And what's interesting is when she opened up the interview talking about how she assumed different things about what it meant to be royalty. Because you grow up in LA, you're around celebrities, and then you go into this world. You know, a lot of people have different notions of what it means to join the royal family, right? And it's not, you know, all this glitz and glamour. I mean, there's some, but it's also like, that depends who you are, right? Within the family. Certainly not her with access to any of these things. And I've always wondered this watching The Crown, to be honest. I've just been like, who are the people who truly are okay with doing nothing all fucking day?
I know.
Like, what do you do with your day? Like, she can't just even sit up and watch Netflix, it seems.
And also, let's just say, I mean, like, Prince Charles is not actually Josh O'Connor, so I wouldn't be sitting there, like, fantasizing about him all day. You know what I'm saying? I also, you know what actually struck me about the interview, as in Meghan talking to Oprah? I found Meghan very self-possessed. And, of course, this is a situation where, did I really know what she sounded like before this? You know, the gifts from Deal or No Deal did not have a voice to them. I've never seen Suits, for example.
Suits?
I did not.
Yeah. Oh, you didn't watch all the seasons of Suits?
You weren't a tailor, as I call the Suits fandom?
I was not a seamster, no. But I thought she had a cool, self-confidence is, I guess, the word, because she kept saying right to Oprah after she would explain something that had happened to her, as if to say, I know I'm being rational about this.
The ability to be so poised, and I can't even fucking spell decorum, first of all. Second of all, the mirroring of Princess Diana with that interview with Martin Bashir and Meghan's, like, this modernity and this ability to, like, keep composure was so beautiful to watch. I wish I could have seen what she was going to bring to Buckingham Palace. You know, I just can't imagine.
What was so interesting about the interview to me is how royally the royals fucked this up, right? You have a mixed race duchess stepping into your world the way that you could have positioned her to solve basically all of your racial problems, you know, to fix years of colonialism and, you know, like the side eyes that people give to the royals, right? Even during the interview, they are constantly still deferential to the crown. They talk about how even though they're away from it and are giving up their official titles, how they would still love to help in any way that they can, because they see the crown as a positive force in the world that can do good, right? You know, and so, like, they're not here to blow up that institution at all. She does not seem like a woman who came in there and was like, I'm about to take this shit down.
Right.
All they had to do was be nice to her. And none of this happens. None of it happens whatsoever. And they couldn't even do that.
No, they basically presented her entire life there through a series of dogma. You know what I mean? Like just, you can't do this. This is not how this is done. You know, this can't change, this can't change. And we'll say we'll protect you, but you're still isolated. Like, they just didn't work with her at all, which is just mind-blowing.
Speaking of protection, back to my mother's comment from the top of this, I wanted to ask you guys, because clearly, did you see how, like, overzealous and excited they would get when they talked about the queen? And they're like, no, she's amazing. She never did anything to hurt us. But ultimately, she is the matriarch and the head monarch and the top of the institution. Why is there a lapse in that like bureaucracy? Where was her protection? Where was the protection from the queen or her family?
You know, it reminds me a bit of how our government, right? You know, when you try and say, why can't this be done? Why can't that be done? You know, because of senators or, you know, like House representatives. And I feel like from what little we've seen in these interviews, or even from watching The Crown, right? You know, like the Crown is a bureaucracy, and there are people who are in control, and it makes you wonder, like, who exactly is running all this, right? Because
there's got to be some Mrs. Danvers of Rebecca fame, you know, like stalking the corridors and making sure, like, everything goes according to that person's plan.
Because not even just Diana, but when other problems and scandals would arise in the royal family over the years, I mean, because Liz has been around for a minute.
Yeah.
Her ass is old, you know? The fact that so many of these things weren't dealt with in a better manner just makes you wonder, like, she doesn't have even full control, right? Because I feel like so many, like Philip, for one, she would have taken care of that nigga a long time ago.
The last thing that I want to say about this interview too was first of all, I'm so excited for Archwell Productions to be making films, movies, all the cinema about whatever the hell they want. And my least favorite thing post Harry and Meghan coming to Canada and subsequently coming to California was the conversation about they're so greedy and they just want to make money off of the queen and the monarchy. And I'm like, I just realized they got no money now other than what Princess Diana has left them, which I'm sure is millions and millions of dollars. But they have to enter the workforce for probably the first time ever as a couple.
I think it's a lot of people press that they are entering the workforce and then, get to make deals with Netflix and things like that. But there's also a misunderstanding about like how much they're using all of that to be helpful in the world, and support their causes. Listen, I'm not trying to be a stan, and say that like I support them above all else, but it really is just a lot of people being dense, even when you see people online, like I just want to know how much they were paid for this interview. When Oprah opens it up saying they weren't paid for the interview, it just means that you are not coming into this with any sort of intelligence. You're already angry and you're just like, I'm going to sit here and watch this and just pout and be mad. It just reminds you that there's always going to be people in the world who just really cannot be convinced of anything. I guess we should know that in a world of QAnon and people who, vote for Republicans. But the fact that you could hear something and then ask that question later, when it's like that's the first thing that was said to you, it's like,
right.
What is warped in your brain?
Also, Meghan Markle is literally an actress, so it makes sense that she would be forward-facing in whatever she chooses to do next. But and
the idea that there's always some things that piss people off and some things that don't, right? Like you're mad that Meghan Markle is making Netflix deals, right? And you hate this person, but you like that Kayla Cuoco is one of the most paid actresses in the world. It's like people can't divorce their racism and internal biases for certain people. And there's always these double standards of when you hate a certain celebrity, it's like they're so privileged and they have all this money. But if it's a celebrity you like a Jon Voight, who's going to say that he loves Trump, then all of a sudden, all of that wealth is okay.
Also, not to go Piers Morgan, but Meghan is lying about one thing. You didn't Google Harry, bitch? I don't believe you. I don't believe you. I truly don't believe you didn't do your research before you became a princess.